I am here. There are those who believe in me, and there are those who are in doubt. Myth, legend, religion. Maybe you agree, but for the sake of you all, I am here. More than that, I am alive. In your moments of joy and delight, I laugh and dance with you. In your moments of pain and despair, I cry with you. My heart breaks for you. In every breath you take, I am with you. Why do you say you cannot see me while you close your eyes? Why do you say you cannot hear my voice while you shut your ears? Why do you say I'm so distant while you push me away? Why? I can't bear standing by watching you suffer any longer. Hate, anger, distrust, betrayal, terror, the downward spiral of crime and addiction. You no longer need to suffer because I have paid your debts. I died for your ransom, and now you are free to live. I wait for you. I wait to be with you. Though you do not seek me, I stay unmoving. You don't have to bear things alone. Come to me. I died and rose again for you.
Welcome to Grace Generation Church at Home. I'm Pastor Tom, and let me start by thanking you for being here today and watching. Before we jump into the teaching, let me ask you to do something. If this is the first time that you've joined us, can you drop me an email at pastortom@gracegenerationchurch.net or just text the word welcome to 509-291-8404. I want to drop you a line and thank you personally and see if I can help you in any way. We've been talking for the last month about receiving our breakthrough. We should all know by now that the first thing we do is seek God and His Word to discover a promise that relates to our breakthrough. Then we place our faith in that promise and begin to act as though we've already received our breakthrough. And we begin to expect God to act on our behalf. We've also talked about some obstacles that we face in receiving our breakthrough, because we have a spiritual enemy who wants to deceive us. And he wants to keep us locked in a prison of deception. Today I want to talk about the fact that any breakthrough we receive doesn't happen in a vacuum. What I mean by this is our breakthroughs happen in the context of relationships. Last week we looked at what it means to have faith, and part of that was that we risk trusting other people. We put our trust in them, and that means that we risk being let down. I know you know what that feels like. I'll bet everyone watching me has been let down by somebody else. A couple of years ago, I was contacted by a local nonprofit agency who blows out sprinklers every fall as a fundraiser. They had done it for me the year before, and so they asked if they could do it again this year, and I said sure. We set up a day and a time, and I checked that off my list. Well, that day came, and that time came, and it went. I thought, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe it was the following week. Again, no show. So I called and left a message, and nothing. I started calling every day to try to figure out what was going on, and finally, after many attempts, I got a hold of someone who said, sorry, must have been a mess up, and we're done for the year. They had let me down, and by the time I figured it out, it was too late. I had to go through the winter without having my sprinklers blown out, and thankfully, I was okay. Now, I know in the big scope of things, that's a pretty minor letdown. I mean, what did it really cost me? Not much. But some of you watching me have had to deal with being let down by others in a much bigger sense. Some of you are dealing with relational letdowns in your life right now. There are some people who have been let down big time, let down by people who should have known better, and it's shaped you towards the negative when it comes to trusting other people. Some of us have been let down by authority figures in our lives, people who we've looked up to, people that we've opened up to and trusted, and they've let us down. Some of us have been physically abused, sexually abused, or emotionally abused, maybe all three. Some people had parents that maybe they weren't actually abusive, but they let you down by simply not being available to you. Sometimes that meant they were out of the picture, and sometimes it just meant that they were so tied up in their own lives, they were just emotionally absent from you. They let you down. Some of you have trusted a person with all of your heart. When they gave you their word, you believed them, and they ended up betraying you. Maybe you shared something very, very personal with them, and they just couldn't wait to go share that with everyone else. These kinds of things leave us feeling rejected and hurting, and too often we start to wonder, who can I trust? Who can I open up to who won't hurt me? Life is full of relational letdowns. The sad fact that I've found to be true in my life is that those who say they are following Christ will let down others just as quickly as those who aren't believers. We tend to think that the standard for a Christian would be different, but in reality, what we find out is that really it isn't all that different. So how do we handle it when we experience letdowns? How can we learn to take the risk of trusting someone else again? Well, I want to start to answer that by looking at the life of Jesus. We know that Jesus walked this earth and was perfect. He was sinless. He never did anything against the laws of God, and he always acted in perfect, loving ways towards others. Even in his relationships, his relationship with his Father and his relationship with others, he was faultless. And yet he consistently experienced relational letdowns from people everywhere he went. You know, I find it interesting that when we read through the Gospels, those books of the Bible that record Christ's life for us, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we don't find any writer who said Jesus smiled or Jesus laughed. Now, I'm sure that he did. I mean, I look around and see some of the people who God has created, and I know he has a sense of humor. So I'm sure Jesus laughed and smiled, but no one wrote about it. But we do read that Jesus wept. We read that Jesus time and time again agonized in relational pain. We read about people who let him down and those who betrayed him. We read about people who hurt him and despised him. But this really shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone, because some 600 years earlier, the prophet Isaiah told us what kind of Savior Jesus would be. Look at what he prophesied about Jesus in Isaiah 53:3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of deep sorrows who was no stranger to suffering and grief. We hid our faces from him in disgust and considered him a nobody, not worthy of respect. Stop a moment and think about this. Jesus, perfect and perfectly sinless, and yet he was despised and rejected. Think about what he went through. He was constantly criticized. They said he was demon-possessed. Some called him a drunkard and a glutton. Others said that he was a false prophet. Even his closest friends, those who said they'd always be there, those who said they'd have his back no matter what, ended up running away and abandoning him in his hour of greatest need. We know that Judas betrayed him, sold him out for some financial gain. And you know how he did it? By kissing him. And it wasn't just a quick peck on the cheek. It might seem odd to us today in our culture, but in Jesus' day, when a student met a rabbi or his teacher, he would kiss him many times from cheek to cheek and then back again. Jesus stood face to face with Judas, and while Judas kissed him many times, he knew he was being betrayed. When I think about how that must have felt, I can't really imagine it. I mean, it seems unthinkable. Here's Jesus, 100% human, 100% God. He spent eternity in perfect fellowship with God the Father and God the Holy Spirit, and now he empties himself to become human so that he can help humankind. And now, one of his closest friends is turning him over to the authorities by kissing his face. But before we get too down on Judas, ask yourself, what would your response have been had you been alive in that day? They rejected him over and over again. The crowds criticized him and abused him, and eventually the authorities killed him. I mean, if that had been me, if I had had supernatural powers, I would have lost it. I mean, someone would have criticized me one too many times, and I'd have said, that's it, from this day forward, you will suffer from hemorrhoids. Right? You know, and you, what are you laughing at me for? Poof, you've got diarrhea. Don't mess with me. Now, I know as a pastor, I should be better than that, and I'm probably going to hear it from my wife for using that illustration, but that's kind of the way I feel sometimes. See, when people let us down, when those we count on betray us or criticize us, it's easy for us to react in ways that are very unchristlike. And people will let us down. And when they do, we react to that. Now let's just take a little time and look at some ways that we can react to relational letdowns. One of the first ways is we can harden our heart. Here's how it happens. Someone hurts us and we say, well, forget that. I'm never going to let anyone hurt me like that again. So we put up a wall. We make sure others are kept at a distance and we create this relational buffer zone. We make sure that no one gets to know the real me. And as we do that, we isolate ourselves and we build layer after layer after layer of protection, and our heart grows harder and harder. I know a lot of people who are walking around with hard hearts today. Another result of relational letdowns is that we react with a prideful heart. This happens when we begin to view people who let us down as inferior to us. We begin to think, I am so much better than them. I mean, I would never do anything like that to another human being. I wouldn't even treat my worst enemy that way. In fact, I wouldn't even treat a cat that way. They deserve to burn in hell for what they did to me. We can develop a prideful heart. Another result can be a sinful heart. Now, understand that sin has no power over a believer. And I'm not referring to an actual sinful heart that the Holy Spirit has come and inhabited. There is no such thing. But in reacting to relational letdowns, we can give the enemy a foothold in our thinking, and by doing so, we become deceived. We begin to justify sinful behavior in our heart. We think, well, I know it's wrong, but God knows how that person treated me. Let me illustrate it this way. Maybe your boss says that you're going to get a raise, but for whatever reason, he hasn't given that to you, and months have gone by, and it seems as if he's forgotten that he even said anything about it. So you think, I deserve that raise, and he said he was going to give it to me, but he lied. So it's okay if I dip into the till a little bit, or if I take some stuff home without paying for it. It's okay. God understands I'm justified because he lied to me and let me down. Or maybe someone has hurt you really bad. It was very personal and ended up deeply wounding you. So you feel justified in telling everybody who will hear how that other person treated you. We know we shouldn't gossip, but we say, I've got to tell someone or I'll burst. God understands. Our reaction to relational letdown can make us justify sin. The fourth result is where many of us live, with a revengeful heart. See, we might never think of actually doing something that would physically hurt someone else, but when we see bad things happen to that person, we think, well, it's about time they got what's coming to them. We actually begin to delight when we see bad things happening to them. One of the greatest tragedies in our walk with God is when we love him and we know he loves us, but because of some relational letdown, we react in a way that leads us to one of these dangerous results. And when that happens, we stagnate in our relationship with God. Sometimes we don't know why it is. Sometimes we'll blame it on other people. We feel as if we're far from the heart of God and we feel distant from our fellow believers, and it's all because we're living with this unresolved hurt. So what do? I mean, maybe as we've gone through this list, you felt the Holy Spirit prompting you that you're living with one of these dangerous results. So what now? How do we resolve it? Well, we do what we need to do whenever we need help, we turn to God. We ask Him to help us. Psalms 46:1 says, God, you're such a safe and powerful place to find refuge. You're a proven help in time of trouble, more than enough and always available whenever I need you. God will help us when we need it the most. Sometimes when the Spirit reveals something to us that's not Christ-like, we feel as though we are in trouble. We think that God's going to be mad at us, but God is a safe and powerful place to find refuge. He's ready to help us. All we need to do is ask Him. I want to look at two prayers that we can pray to God that will defeat these dangerous results of relational letdown. If we consistently ask for God's help and lean into Him as we experience hurt and betrayal, we will continue to see more and more of Christ in our lives. These two prayers will help us in everything from our marriages to our friendships, employment to even ministry. They will help us receive our breakthrough from God. Here's the first prayer. God, help me to have a thicker skin. Every time we experience hurt from someone else, pray this prayer. God, help me to have a thicker skin. That means we simply don't let those letdowns get to us. Asking God to help you live with thicker skin is a prayer asking God to make you wise. Proverbs 19:11 says this, a wise person demonstrates patience, for mercy means holding your tongue. When you're insulted, be quick to forgive and forget it, for you are virtuous when you overlook an offense. That word that is translated overlook is the Hebrew word abar. It literally means to pass over. So it's the wise person who will pass over an offense, to try to rise above it, to overlook it. Now I know some people who have a hard time with that. They're people who seem to be offended all the time. They listen to what others say and they try to find some way to be offended in it. They don't pass over an offense, they get under it. They wallow in it, they bathe in it, they marinate in it, and they wear it like a badge. They are people who have defined themselves as the victim, not just in a single offense, but in life. So they look around and they actually find people who will let them down, so they can continue to be the victim. And if they can't find someone who will offend them, well, then they try to find someone else who has been offended, and they take on their offense. You know, they say things like, did so-and-so shake your hand this morning? They didn't shake my hand either. What have we done that was so bad? Or, I can't believe that I spent all this money getting my hair done and no one even noticed. Can you believe they sat in my seat? I mean, they know I always sit there and they just plop down without even asking me. These are people who are so easily offended, and then they can't understand why their life is so miserable. Think about a Jesus that was easily offended. You know, he feeds the 5,000, and the next day he tells his disciples something like this. Well, that's the last time I ever do that. And John says, oh, really, Jesus? Why is that? Well, do you know not a single person wrote me a thank you note? I can't believe how ungrateful they are. By the way, I'm upset with you guys too. I mean, not a single one of you asked me if I wanted seconds while you just sit there and stuffed your faces. Did you hear what those Pharisees said about me? Do you see how they tried to trick me? Why do they have to hate on me like that? It's just not fair. I can't take it anymore. Sounds silly, doesn't it? Yet we see people who describe themselves as a follower of Jesus acting like that every day. The problem is they are so distracted by people that they take their eyes off God. Look, I know there are things that have happened to me that I need to just abar. I just need to get over them. I need to realize that I'm just being overly sensitive. I'm reacting to relational letdowns, and the results are dangerous. What did Jesus say? If someone hits you on the cheek, what are you supposed to do? Take it to heart? Whine about it to anyone who will listen? Go and tell everyone how bad that person is who hit us? No. He said, turn the other cheek. Get over it. Abar it. Jesus reminded the disciples of this principle when he sent them out 2 by 2 into the towns and cities. He knew some of the people would reject the message they were bringing. He knew that some of them would actually be rude or maybe even worse to his disciples. But he didn't tell them to call down fire from heaven. He didn't say, take it to heart and go into depression. What he said was, dust your feet off and go on to the next town. Abhor it, overlook the offense, and just get on with the mission you've been given. Let me give you a couple of thoughts that will help you think thicker. People will let you down, so stop hoping they won't. Now that's the truth. Nowhere in the Bible will you find it saying that we need to depend on each other to never let us down. It's not possible. That's God's job, and that's just the way it is. People will let you down just like you will let others down. I remember growing up, my sister had a Siamese cat. That cat's name was Ting, and that cat loved my sister. He would sit in her lap and just purr and purr. Every time I tried to pet that cat, it snarled at me. That really bothered me. I mean, that cat would hide and wait for me to walk barefoot by and then sneak up from behind me and scratch my ankles. I finally figured it out. I was expecting something from that cat that he was never going to give me. People are just like that cat. People will let you down, so stop hoping they won't. Here's a second thicker thought. People can't meet your needs, so stop hoping that they will. God is the only one who meets our needs. Now, sometimes God uses people to meet our needs, but nowhere in the Bible do we read, trust in people with all your heart, right? It says trust in God with all your heart. Over and over it tells us that God will meet our needs. It says that when we're in trouble, it's God we should run to. We need to stop looking for our needs to be met in the wrong place. Our marriages would become much closer to what God designed them to be if we stopped looking to our spouse to fill needs that God never intended for them to meet. People will let you down, but God will not. We look to God for affirmation. We look to God to be built up. We look to God for our security. Look at our next verse here. It's 1 Corinthians 4:12. When people abuse and insult us, we respond with a blessing. We don't respond by receiving an offense and calling a lawyer to sue them. We don't take them down a dark alley and make sure they never do that again. We overcome evil with good. That's the first prayer. God, help me to live with thicker skin. That's a great defense. Develop a thicker skin. Here's the second prayer, and it's even more important than the first. It's a prayer of holy offense. Not offense, but offense. God, help me to love with a softer heart. Listen, our effectiveness in this mission of helping others discover, receive, and follow Jesus really hinges on these two prayers. If we have a thin skin, if we look to people for our affirmation, we will never reach the level of influence we need to be effective. But at the same time, unless we keep depending on God to soften our hearts towards others, we will never care for the lost the way He does. We've looked at it at least 100 times. When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandments were, He answered by saying, it's all about loving God and loving others. God places the highest of priorities on relationships. And if we don't have a soft heart to love with, we will never be effective. I've met Christians who have been hurt, and as a result, they end up building walls around their hearts that guard and protect them. But in the process, they lose the ability to experience intimacy with anyone. Jesus came to change that. If you've received Him into your life, then trust Him to protect and guard your heart. He knows how to do that. When mankind was at its worst, Jesus was at His best. It was in the biggest relational betrayal and abandonment of His life that we find Jesus loving those who were betraying and abandoning Him with a soft heart. Look at His words in Luke 23:24. While they were nailing Jesus to the cross, He prayed over and over, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Look, I could stand here and share with you some of the causes for the scars that I have. I could tell you that in almost 22 years of serving this church, I've had some painful experiences. People who lie to you, people who abuse you and say hateful things to you and about you. I know some of you are watching me right now and you've experienced pain at the hands of others. People you've trusted who betrayed you. People who abused you. Parents or other relatives who should have known better and yet they took advantage of you anyway. Pastors who should have been loving and kind towards you, but instead they condemned you and spewed hate towards you. Maybe it was a spouse who promised to love you forever and then carelessly and thoughtlessly crushed your heart and their promise. There is pain all around us, and if we allow it to crush us, our hearts can grow smaller and harder and more unloving. We need to pray to God, help me to love with a softer heart. I believe that some of you watching need to have an encounter with God. There is some relational struggle you're in right now, or maybe it's something that has been haunting you for a long time. God is telling you, deal with it today. Don't allow your heart to grow any smaller. Don't allow it to grow any colder. God is saying, it's time to allow me to do some heart surgery. In Ezekiel 36:26, we have this promise, and I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. It can happen today. Only God can change a heart. By the power of God, we can we can rise above our hurt and our pain. We can forgive and live with a softer heart, the kind of heart that God puts in us. Here's my guess. Most of us, if we're open to hearing from God, right now we're feeling one of two things. Either something like, you know what, I am too sensitive. People hurt me and I seem to just dwell on it and I can't get over it. If that's you, let me encourage you to ask God to give you a thicker skin. Satan will use your sensitivity to distract you and get you sidetracked so you'll miss your breakthrough. But God can help you. Let me encourage you to ask Him for help. Others of us are feeling something else. I really have been hurt and hurt badly. Maybe someone has let you down and it was such a letdown that you just can't seem to forgive them. Maybe there's hatred in your heart. Maybe there's bitterness or unforgiveness. Maybe it's the kind of wounds that you carry and they are so deep you've never told anyone about them. They've trapped you in a prison of loneliness. Sometimes things can happen to us that are horrific. Things that are in no way our fault, and they leave us with wounds that are of the worst kind. I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't be feeling the way that you are right now, because that's not true. But I know we serve a God who's in the business of taking broken things and making them whole. He's in the business of taking hard, stony hearts and making them tender and loving. He makes all things new. I want to close by reading something from Psalms 34. David wrote this psalm at a very low point in his life. Everyone had abandoned him. He was doing everything that he was supposed to do, and yet it seemed as if everyone was against him. He had even had to say goodbye to his best friend, Jonathan. He had been anointed as the next king, and this threatened King Saul, who was now chasing him, trying to kill him. He had been forced to live life on the run, and at this point in time, he's living in a cave, and it's there that David turns to God and writes in Psalms 34, 17 through 19, "When holy lovers of God cry out to Him with all of their hearts, the Lord will hear them and come to rescue them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to all whose hearts are crushed by pain, and He is always ready to restore the repentant one. Even when bad things happen to the good and godly ones, the Lord will save them and not let them be defeated by what they face." Pull it down. I want to thank you so much for watching today. I want you to know that if you want more information about what I've talked about today, or if you want someone to pray with you, simply text the word MORE to 509-291-8000. 8404, or you can send me an email at pastortom@gracegenerationchurch.net. I would love to support you in any way that I can. I'd also like to invite you to our in-person gatherings. We meet every Sunday at 10 a.m. at 5601 West Clearwater Avenue, Suite 103 in Kennewick, Washington. I hope to see you there, and please introduce yourself to me and let me know that you saw us online first. Until next week, remember that God is on your side. May He bless you and keep you, protect you and sustain you. May He look at you with His favor and be gracious to you and surround you with His loving kindness.